On tonight's agenda, recently elected MLC Paul Craine tells us why we should be concerned about the growing imbalance between the economically active population and those who depend on them, while Health Minister Lawrie Hooper, MHK, tells me why he asked Tynwald to give the Health Department an extra 10 million. Paul Craine, MLC. Bet you never thought you'd be calling yourself something like that.
No, I didn't. I really didn't, Phil. Yeah, I had, some years ago, I had some hopes that I might make it into the Keys and stood twice, and that didn't work out. And after the second time, I said on the radio straight after the election, I was asked would I stand again. I said, no, I don't think so. I've pushed at the door twice. It hasn't opened. And I kind of had an understanding with Anne, my wife, that I would stand for the Keys twice, and if the door didn't open, well, I wouldn't keep on trying, as we've seen some people do. That was the end of it. So I really thought that was the end of it, and I hadn't thought of the possible MLC route at all until we got to the election. It became clear that perhaps two of the MLCs would be going into the Keys, and there might be an unusual opening, a sort of by-election short-term opening. So yeah, and then things fell into place, really. And
have you enjoyed it so far?
I have. It's been a shock. The day I was elected, I can only say that I was stunned. It took me the whole day, really, to get my head around it. And then the first session in Tynwald, I was pinching myself. You look at the Tynwald Chamber and sort of think, I'm in the Parliament. What a responsibility, what a privilege, an extraordinary position. And to some extent, I'm still pinching myself. But I've just got this 15-month slot, and then would have to put my name forward to be re-elected by the Keys. And I want to make the most of that. So that's what I've tried to do. But it's an extraordinary privilege.
And it is fair to say that you are hitting the ground running, in as much as you have had a motion on the order paper last week, and it got unanimous support. So you must be pretty pleased with that.
Oh, delighted with that, yes. But why wouldn't people support it, in a sense, if you look at the problem? And I had an opportunity to do a presentation to Tynwald members sort of outlining what the latest census has shown, which is only really what it was showing 5 years ago, but slightly exacerbated. And when you look at that and you look at the difficulty we've got, and you can even make comparisons going back to the late 1960s when these issues were there again, an imbalance in population, and it does look like something. Yes, we should try to do something about this, although I think some people are still unsure that we can do anything about it, but I believe we can, and I think we should try.
What you've asked for is that Tynwald recognises the demographic challenges facing our island, recognises the long-term implications of population imbalance, accepts that this is often a complex problem that cuts across many different government departments covering housing, education, healthcare, well-being, employment and economic growth. Well, surely to goodness that those issues should be the bread and butter of all the relevant departments.
I think they're often invisible as the difficulty until you see a population profile. And for me, I'm very visual in the way I understand things, so until you see that population profile, and you see that the Isle of Man doesn't have a population pyramid, as these often get called, but we have a sort of population anvil because of the age structure, until you see that the fall in births in the Isle of Man since 2010, and there was a 35% drop in births over a 10-year period. Until you see that and you see how that's affecting the population profile, and then until you recognise that gap in the 0 to 4-year-olds that's there in the current profile, that will still be visible in 70 years' time, because it'll never get such age-specific immigration to fill the gap. It'll still be there in the pyramids in 70 years' time. And that's an extraordinary thought when you look at it. And then when you look at the bit in the middle and say, well, in our 20 to 24-year-olds especially, over the last two censuses, we've seen for every 3 people moving in, and this is in that age group. This is not about university movements, because when you're at university, you're still resident here. Okay,
Yeah.
for every 3 people moving in, between 8 and 10, over 2 censuses, 10 years, have moved out. 3 in, 8 to 10 out. 10 in the first census, 8 in the second census.
And this is specifically at the younger age group.
This is 20 to 24-year-olds. You know, as the 15 to 19s became the 20 to 24-year-olds, you can do the maths of how it's moved, and we've got this loss. So we've got this very considerable loss of 20 to 24-year-olds. We don't have data on, well, do they return? You know, when there are evidence that the age and sex profile of the immigrant group coming to the Isle of Man, they are quite a few in their 30s and 40s, but not in the 20s, really. You know, not in the 15 to 19.
Of the people who leave to go away to university, 50% of them stay away, 50% of them come back. So of the 8 that are out, potentially 4 of them might come back at some point.
Well, they might do and they might not. I think the figure's actually the sort of 50%. This is probably coming from the survey that was done by the University College of Man, and this was asking about intentions rather than measuring actual movements. So yes, around 50%, maybe just slightly under, of the people in the final year at university want to or intend to come back to the Isle of Man. And that was when I worked in the education department, I think about 2004. There was a similar survey done. It produced very similar results, that those who are away at university, are half of them are interested in coming back.
The greatest portion of the population is aged at that 65 down to about 50 level.
Yep.
All of those are going to be approaching retirement in the next 15 years or reaching retirement age. So the costs associated with that are obviously additional pension payments, additional healthcare requirements potentially, additional care homes and residential care for support for people as they start to become less capable of looking after themselves. And that's why this matters, because you've got this very large group about to reach retirement, and a much smaller group coming along to joining the ranks of the employed to try and fund that through their taxes.
Okay, I'd want to sort of balance that view a little bit. You're absolutely right. We have got this very large group. In terms of the percentage of the population aged over 65 years, we're up in the top 6 countries on the planet, so it's quite an extreme group that we've got. But I would want to balance the idea that there's nothing wrong with being old. You know, I'm in this over 65 group myself, and I'm hugely aware that there was some work done on the Isle of Man back in 2015 by the University of the Third Age, and they had a report called Not Old But Gold, and they were looking at the value of older people to the community. They were making use of a similar document produced by WRVS back in 2010, and they had estimated that the net value of the over 65 population in the UK, net value, so this is the value on top of the healthcare costs and on top of the pension costs and so on, they were contributing £40 billion to the UK economy. You know, so older people do contribute. It doesn't always show on GDPs or things like that, because some of the value that they do is enabling their children and grandchildren to continue working when someone's ill or whatever, so it has a value, but it doesn't get recorded anywhere as a value.
And I suppose this comes back to the question we were discussing earlier, which was this whole point, the way in which we do government. I mean, you would think that everything you're talking about in this motion are things that should be being considered by government, but government is set up to deal with matters in a particular way, and it's very much focused on budget. But this is the problem with government, isn't it? We focus on things as single standalone issues and miss the some of these broader points.
And we focus on perhaps more than we should, on 5-year intervals, which at least in the Legislative Council, I am not working on a 5-year and seeking re-election at the end of that. But there's part of the debate, if you like, at the moment. The group we've got set up now, this select committee on the population imbalance, will need, I believe, to look at things across government. That's what it's built into the motion, really. But when you're doing that, you can see how, in relation to the island plan, which is a flexible plan that's still growing and being added to, but will tighten up as departments are required to report back to Tynwald on how the plan's progressing. Where does it fit? And in the dialogue that I had with the Chief Minister before the plan was produced, he accepted what I was trying to work towards and has built it in. It's there right in the middle of the plan, but it's in this section on growing the economy and economic diversity and so on. I would have put it in the developing stronger communities bit, because that, for me, it's more about community, and that's where it's a different view of the imbalance. Okay, we can look at the imbalance and say, well, more older people costs us fewer younger people, there's fewer people paying tax. That's an economic perspective of this. But the community perspective of this is that we develop quite an imbalanced community. And there are wider concerns there. There was some of the consultations that have gone on in relation to climate change, including the latest one, which showed it had 600-odd respondents, and there was a split. 51% thought that we needed to have the higher target, the interim target, at 45%. That doesn't mean it was 51 to 49, because the other groups were split between, but 51% said we should have the higher target. But when you looked at the age profiles of respondents, it was 100% of 16-year-olds. It was almost 80% of getting up into the early 20s. By the time you got into 30s, it was 70, and it dropped. And you had this. Here was a political topic, if you like, and you could equally call it environmental or whatever, but a political topic where the views changed across the ages. And one of the concerns in the Isle of Man would be this lost voice of the younger age group, because they're so far outnumbered by the older age group. So it has political dimensions, it has social dimensions, and this lack of births. One of the other features we've got in the population, in the group that are demographically known as women of childbearing age, which sounds terribly exclusive when you say that's 15 to 44, but that's the group that's usually taken demographically. That group in the Isle of Man over the last 10 years is down more than 11%. So fewer women means fewer births, means fewer women of childbearing age in 20 years' time or something. And that's a real concern when you look at that, And
I suppose the other element to all of this is, we've got to recognise that politicians, the majority of politicians in Tynwald are elected by the Manx public, and if the Manx public happens to be in that much older age group, why would you be spending lots of time focusing on policies to attract and encourage young people to move to or stay on the island when your core vote is the older population who may be looking for quite radically different things and maybe not understand at all why you would want to focus on these things?
That's right. And that's where there needs to be a wake-up call, in a sense, because across the European Union now, I think more than half the countries in the European Union have what are called pro-natalist policies. But I recognise that some people see that as a red flag term. I use it sort of purely demographically. This is not about forcing young people to have families, by any stretch of it. One of the things I recognise when you're looking at there's a fall in birth rates right around the world, but being particularly heavily felt in developed countries at the moment, where the fall in births takes you below the line at which you would maintain the population, usually taken as 1.9 births per female in this age group. And when you look at that, there's 23 countries in the world at the moment that are forecast to have their population halved by the end of this century. Okay, the expectation in China is very close to that China's 1.4 billion will be down to 700 million at the end of this century, although China has quickly taken steps to end the one-child policy and encourage 3 children and so on. And one of the reasons for the changes that are happening, and there's 3 or 4 scenarios that you can take, but one of them is the role of women has so changed across these developed countries. The levels of education, the opportunities, the work opportunities, working as chief executives and everything else. We've got this picture that the women are choosing not to have children. In the UK, in last year, 2021, the average age at which the women were giving birth to their first child topped 30 for the first time, and that really is quite a shift. So this is happening all over, nowhere as strongly as the Isle of Man at the moment, but this is happening, and that's one of the reasons. And so these countries are looking at ways to help to make it possible for those people to have families. Then there's another line in there that says, well, okay, it might be about women, but it's also about austerity, that people are being forced to choose in a world where salaries of a couple may be 7 times less than the price of a property. How do they cope with that? So people choosing between owning a house or having a family. And then a couple of other groups in there. There's this global decline in sperm counts, and there's some concern about younger people, that people are choosing not to have a family because of climate change issues and their concerns over that.
I think quite clear from what you're saying that there is an issue and it needs to be addressed. I haven't really pressed you very much on what the answers might be, but I would certainly look forward to doing that as we get a bit closer to, when you report back to Tynwald. Yeah. Off the top of your head, have you got 2 or 3 key areas that you think that we really do need to focus on?
I'm really happy that the committee will decide this. So it's I'm one of 3 on the committee. We haven't met for the first time yet, so happy that that's the position we're in. The areas where I suspect we are likely to be looking at is what we can do to support young families in relation to housing, what we can support young families in relation to childcare, and some of these are already issues that are on the go, the new housing board and things like that. So some of these are areas on the go. What we can do about support and bringing up a child, beyond childcare. It's interesting to see several European countries now give you a lump sum when you give birth. So the likes of France, which has childcare policies in place. But they're now giving €950 for each birth, as a lump sum, and it's interesting to see those sort of types of incentives, whether that's the direction that would be appropriate for the Isle of Man is something we'd have to think through. So there's a number of areas that education, housing, healthcare, a range of things come across. But availability of childcare would be one of those. So it really is a range of issues. There is not going to be a single fix-it point here that we can say, we changed that and all this will change. It's not going to be like that. And although there might be some quick wins, this is a longer term thing than that. And the fact that the Isle of Man was working on it in 1960s and we've lost sight of it, but it's reappeared, is a reminder that population and community and economy in the Isle of Man are all interlaced. And it's a reminder that we do have to keep our eye on the population structure because it is an issue. It can easily occur in a small nation like this. It can easily throw up some variations on what you'd like to think of as being a more regular, more balanced pattern.
That was Paul Craine, MLC. Now, Health Minister Lawrie Hooper tells us why his department needs another £10 million. So, Minister, a really quite extraordinary position of having to go back to Tynwald to seek £10 million. Imagine what many of the other departments could do with money like that. So what on earth's happened?
I'm not sure you can describe something that has happened every year for the last 7 years as an extraordinary position. I think it's become business as usual, unfortunately. And I think I've been quite clear, the health department has been underfunded. And I think 7 consecutive years of being roughly 8.7 million over every year shows we're about 8.7 million under budget. I don't think you can argue against that. And I think that's one of the driving reasons behind the recommendations in Sir Jonathan Michael's report around needing a new funding formula, which is what we've agreed to this year, a new mechanism, a new increases, and the 21 million that's essentially going into the health service in this year's budget. But last year we didn't have that.
So how much of this overspend, underfund is actually down to COVID this year?
That's a tricky one to answer. So the 10 million that we've gone to ask for is to cover a £9 million forecast overspend. None of that is directly related to COVID, because all of those COVID costs, which are about £23 million, have been taken out of the contingency funding. But COVID has had a big impact on things like the availability of UK agency staff, the availability of UK surgeries, and the cost of drugs. So indirectly, COVID has caused pressures on the health service that amount to a big chunk of this amount, actually. So about half the overspend is to do with the pay awards. The rest of it is to do with these kind of unexpected or unprecedented pressures we're facing on things like drugs costs and the tertiary costs in the UK.
But surely there will be savings resulting from COVID as well, in as much as there won't have been as many general operations and the operation, at least of the hospital, has had to be inhibited to a certain extent because of COVID.
In part, but they are quite significantly outweighed by the costs, unfortunately. And whilst some things have been stopped, they've more been delayed. So all it's really doing is pushing costs into different parts of the year. So yes, you're right. In some respects, there have been things that haven't happened, but we're still paying staff, we're still paying the bills. Actually, everything is still going on pretty much from that side of things, at least as normal. And any savings that have resulted from COVID clearly have been just wiped out, really, by all the other impacts. There have also been savings that Manx Care have made in all these areas with some of the work they've done. So the medicines optimisation team, for example, have saved something in the region of £400,000 on the drugs bill. But when you're looking at nearly a £5 million overspend, it barely touches the sides, really.
I know Chris Thomas had specifically mentioned the administrative costs, and was it something like 2.5 or 3?
3.5 million, I think was the original estimated cost.
So 3.5 million additional administrative costs. I mean, I think most taxpayers would accept that it's important to pay for doctors and nurses, but why is it important to be spending 3.5 million extra for bureaucrats?
So in short, you're not paying for bureaucrats, you're paying for people to professionally manage your health service, and that's what we've been lacking in recent years, is that professional direction. And you've had lots of political decisions being made that really should not have been political decisions. They should have been clinical decisions made for clinical reasons, and unfortunately you do have to employ the right people to do that, and that does have a cost. One of the key aims of Manx Care, though, is to find savings, and this year so far they've managed to find 1.7 million in savings, so that's half the cost of the additional layer of bureaucracy essentially met. The future targets are higher. They are aiming to, like I say, cover their own costs, but ultimately the proof is going to be in the pudding. Can they bring down waiting lists? Can they bring down waiting times? Can we improve the quality of the health service we have on the Isle of Man? And I think if we see much better outcomes at the end of this, I would argue it's worth every penny that we spend on it.
And Manx Care is now effectively not politically accountable. Effectively, it sits outside of the political process. It's there to deliver. You set the policy and you take the rap. And Manx Care are effectively left to get on with it, and no one can touch them.
Not quite. So they are a statutory board, so they are accountable in their own right, just in the same way any other statutory board is accountable in terms of their finances. They are accountable to me as Minister and to us as a department to make sure they are delivering on track in line with the strategy and policy and the direction that we set, and obviously they're accountable in terms of their spending. My understanding is they can be called in front of select committees, for example, as well, so I would not be surprised to see the Public Accounts Committee or the Social Affairs Committee calling Manx Care in and actually grilling them directly on their operational delivery, because like you say, I'm going to take the rap for a lot of the big strategic policy decisions, and I'm happy to do that. That's my job. But actually, if Manx Care are making bad operational decisions, I've got to hold them accountable, and actually I would expect the political scrutiny process to do the same thing.
You've always been a minister or a politician that I've found to be very honest and trustworthy. You tend to say what you mean. You've said that this is the last time the department's coming for back to Tynwald to cover overspends unless there are extraordinary circumstances. Is that putting a gun to your own head?
Possibly, but that's my ambition, actually, and the whole purpose of agreeing the new funding formula is to try and stop this continuous issue of overspend. The whole purpose of setting up Manx Care in the first place is to try and stop these supplementary votes being necessary. So if we've done all of this and we're still coming back trying to deal with legacy issues and systemic spending problems, then we're not doing something isn't working. I can't say hand on heart it's definitely not going to happen, because things do happen. Health is very much a demand-led service, and I think the public would expect, if we do have increased costs, say sending people to the UK, that we don't make the choice not to treat patients. So that I think there's definitely some leeway in this. But no, the absolute starting line for this financial year is we know Manx Care are going to be under pressure. They're forecasting £18 million of cost pressures already, and the growth budget was £17.9 million. So we know that we're going to be under pressure. But the absolute bottom line is, this is your budget, this is your financial envelope, work within it, and only come back to Treasury and ask for extra funding if you can really justify it and something really exceptional or extraordinary has happened.
Almost 6 months into the job, you've just been handed £10 million, 9 million of which is accounted for. $1 million is just, well, we'll give him an extra $1 million just in case he needs it. They obviously must think you're doing a reasonable job.
It was nice to get unanimous support in Tynwald. Just to clarify that we won't be drawing down on the money if we don't need it. So we've asked for up to 10. If we only need 9, we'll only be taking 9. But that's, again, money the department will hold, and we'll be distributing it to Manx Care if they can justify, and when they can justify they need that funding. But no, it was nice to have that unanimous support in Tynwald, and there was a bit of challenge from a few members, from Chris Thomas and one or two others. But broadly, I think people understand the pressures the health service is under, and it was nice actually to get their support, especially seeing as a good chunk of the additional funding is actually for the pay award that's being negotiated at the moment. And so I think it was quite reassuring to feel that Tynwald is supportive of actually that pay award, at least, and offering staff something that is meaningful.
It is reasonable to assume that much of the work suggested by Mr. Craine should be being done by government anyway. So was the committee set up to keep him and fellow committee members Chris Thomas and Michelle Haywood busy? And will Lawrie Hooper finally put an end to the health department's overspends? It's been promised before, but sadly not achieved. This programme is available as a podcast, which you can access from Manx Radio's website. Please get in touch with Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com if you have any views or thoughts on the programme. But for now, I'm Phil Gaughan. Guramayu. Thanks for listening.